and please pray with me. Good and gracious God, may the words from my lips and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable to you, my rock and redeemer. Amen. When I was a student in seminary, I also worked on our daycare that was on campus. This daycare was in a small center in one of our student apartments. And because it was a small center, it didn't give our kids a lot of room to run around. And if you know kids, they need to run. And it made for some really long days in the winter when it was too cold to get them outside. So as they say, desperate times call for desperate measures. We began to allow our toddler class to run in the hallways. Now, as I mentioned, these were the hallways where people were living and studying and sleeping. So we couldn't just let them run wild like a herd of tiny elephants. There were rules. The first rule was no talking, only whispering when we were in the hallway. The second rule was we'd line up, and one child at a time got to run all the way to the back of the hallway and then run all the way back to us. As it was hard to wait, right, when you're two and you know you get to run, so we would count, whispering, as they would run, so we could time each of them and see who could make it down the hall the fastest. And with the timing, and because they knew that their turn was coming soon, usually our little ones were really good about following the rules. But when you're two, sometimes you forget the rules. So we had a few times like that. Like the time little Isabel was next in line, and instead of waiting, she took off right away, running in the hallway, passing the person in front of her, so excited to run. Now, I also had to follow the rules, right? So I couldn't yell at her to come back. Instead, I was going to wait and talk to her when she returned. But at that moment, her mom, who was the director of our daycare, came around the corner. And I thought, even better, Mom can handle this instead of me. Mary Beth was familiar with our habit of running the hallways, so she knew right away what was going on. But when Isabel returned, she ran right into her mom's arms, and she said, "Mama, I just love running." And Mary Beth melted, and she simply replied, "I love to see you do what you love." And then she looked up, and she caught my expression over her daughter's head, and I'm sure that expression was a little bit judgy. And she said, I know I should have reminded her of the rules, but we are a family of rule followers. I follow the rules, my husband follows the rules, my little daughter Hannah always follows the rules. None of us would ever put doing something we love above doing what we were supposed to do. But Belle did. And Belle will learn to follow the rules, but I never want her to lose embracing fully the things she loves to do. And those words stuck with me, mostly because I am also a rule follower, and I am usually much better at doing what I am supposed to do than fully embracing those things I love, those things I just can't help but do. And as I reflect on our story from Luke, I can see how doing what we are supposed to do can get in the way of living the way we are made for and embracing those things that give us love. We hear in our gospel reading today that Jesus was traveling between the border of Samaria and Galilee. And it's not surprising that lepers called out to Jesus in that area. Lepers were shunned. This was because they were contagious and also because they were considered unclean. So the rule was that they needed to live on the outside, that they couldn't be part of the community or the temple. There was no job for them. There was no family life. These were the rules they needed to follow. And I imagine they were pushed to the outskirts not just because they were contagious, but also because people didn't want to see them. They didn't want to see the life they had to live. They didn't want to see their fear and loneliness or their suffering and pain. It was better to keep them out of sight. But rather than take a direct route to Jerusalem, Jesus goes right to the places that most people avoid. And we hear that these lepers continue to follow the rules. They call out to Jesus, but from a safe distance. And Jesus sees them, and he replies with healing, saying, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." Now, this may seem like an odd reply, but this was the next step for healing and a path back into community. Just like there were rules when you were a leper, there was rules when you were healed. So if you were healed as a leper, then you needed to go to a priest. They needed to check you out and give you the A-OK, say that you were no longer contagious and dangerous, and then they would declare you clean and reinstate you into life at the temple and in your community. These were the rules to follow. And so we hear when these lepers were healed that 9 went and did what they were told, but 1 did not. 1 on the way back to Jerusalem must have noticed that he was healed, and he turned back. He ran back, and he threw himself at Jesus' feet, praising God and giving thanks. We hear this man was a Samaritan, so he wouldn't have had these rules. He wasn't going to be restored to Jewish community. He did not need to go and see a priest. And maybe being on the outside of these rules, maybe that freed him to forget about the rules and to run to Jesus instead. One of my favorite preachers, Barbara Brown Taylor, when talking about this text, says that 10 set out for Jerusalem to claim their free gifts, as they were told. But only 1 turned back and gave himself to the giver instead. 9 behaved like good lepers, good Jews. Only 1, who was a double loser, a Samaritan and a leper, behaved like a man in love. 9 behaved like good lepers. 1 behaved like a man in love. Again, sometimes it is so much easier to do what we are supposed to do than to turn to love. When it comes to life and faith, I know well how to be obedient, to read my Bible, to say my prayers, to show up here in worship. And I'm guessing that as all of you are gathered with me today, you know a thing or two about being obedient too, which is good. This is what discipleship is based on, being able to obediently follow Jesus and follow faith practices. This obedience is a steady faith that keeps our church going, that keeps us on course. It is needed. There is nothing wrong with being obedient. But when it comes to faith and life, I know how to be obedient. I wonder if I know how to behave like someone in love, to recklessly throw myself at Jesus' feet, to let go of some of that tightly held control and fully turn to the one I love. When this man does this, when he falls at Jesus' feet, Jesus asks, "Were not 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Had no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Rise and go, your faith has made you well." Where are the other 9? It's easy to hear that as a reprimand from Jesus, and it feels a little odd. Didn't Jesus tell those 9 to go and show themselves to the priest? Weren't they only doing what they had been told? Weren't they doing what they were supposed to do? And can we blame them for wanting to hurry to Jerusalem? Would anyone be anxious to get those boxes checked and finally get back to life, to return to their temple, their work, their families? They had lived a lonely, scary, isolated life. Of course, they were anxious for more. But now I hear Jesus' question, where are the other 9? Not as a reprimand, but as a lament. In doing only what they were supposed to do and concentrating on those next steps, those other 9 missed that opportunity to fall at Jesus' feet in praise. And it wasn't that Jesus needed that praise and gratitude. It was that Jesus knew those 9 needed that praise and gratitude. 10 lepers were healed, but only 1, the one who turned back, was told he was made well, which tells us there is wellness and wholeness to be found when we turn back and give our whole selves back to the giver. There is wellness and wholeness when we turn back and acknowledge that all we have, all that we are, and all that we are given is given to us by God. I think in his healing, in that moment he saw he had been made well, that 10th leper, he got to see himself as Jesus saw him, as someone worthy of healing, of someone worthy of a full life. He got to see himself as a beloved child of God. And knowing that was how Jesus saw him, as someone who deserved more, well, why wouldn't he take a moment and bask in the presence of the one who saw him as beloved, precious, and chosen? And why wouldn't we take a moment and bask in the presence of one who sees us as beloved, precious, and chosen? The other 9, it's not that they missed something they were supposed to do, another item to check off their list to get reinstated. They instead missed an opportunity to do nothing more or less than to lay at Jesus' feet in thankfulness. We heard that today we continue in our Made For series. We've talked all fall about the things we are made for, that we are made to be known, and we are made for forgiveness, and we are made to be brave. We are made for much. And today we hear we are made for gratitude. And gratitude, of course, is fitting this week. This is a week that we give thanks. If you have a parent like mine, you won't get to eat turkey until you've all gone around the table and shared at least one thing that you are thankful for. But it is good and important that we have this time set aside where we reflect on how we were made. We are created to give thanks and praise to God. And as I reflect on this story and think through the difference between doing what we are supposed to do and turning to God in love and gratitude, I can't help but think that somewhere along the way we mixed up gratitude with mere politeness or obedience, that we're missing the big fullness of gratitude. And I want to reclaim that for us. Much like those 9 lepers, we can miss how overwhelming the nature of gratitude can be when we get too busy doing what we are supposed to do, when we focus too hard on our own lives. I know that just this morning as I was driving to church, in my head was going as often as a list of things to do. And on that list was to buy Christmas gifts for all of my kids' teachers. And while I was thinking about this and what I should get, did I take a moment to think what a gift these individuals had been in my life? Did I take a moment to thank God for these people who have loved and shaped and shared so much kindness and caring with my children? No. I thought about the gifts I would buy, and then I am on to the next thing. But now as I take that moment, I think, wow, I'm a little bit in awe in the people that God puts in our lives. How great these people have been for all of our family, and how lucky we have been that they have walked beside them. That is just one small example of the way we miss these gifts we've been given and taking the time to appreciate it, to feel that gratitude. And when we do that, we miss the overwhelming nature of gratitude. Instead, when we think gratitude, we think only of little things like writing thank you notes, buying those gifts. And those are kind and wonderful things to do. But at its heart, gratitude is not a task. Gratitude is not checking boxes or evening scales or being polite. We can't shrink gratitude into that polite response or return kindness, because that is not enough. And we are made for so much more. We are made for the deep and real gratitude that comes when we remember that every gift received, every joy we hold, every possession we own is not earned, not deserved, but given to us from God. And when we see that we, like that 10th leper, we see that we have been given wholeness and wellness and abundant life, and all we have to do is receive it. We have to do nothing but receive these gifts we have been given. And then when we really realize that, then we begin to know gratitude. And I want to reclaim this big, bold, reckless gratitude. That kind of gratitude that humbles us. The kind of gratitude that can stop us in our tracks. That kind of gratitude that can turn our lives around and have us rush back to Jesus. I think you know this kind of gratitude. This is the kind of gratitude you find in holding your brand new baby in your arms and feeling so overwhelmed and so undeserving of all that you have been blessed with. It's the kind of gratitude you find when you stare into the night sky, which is full of stars, and it feels so vast, and you are overwhelmed in awe, because in that moment you know that God is so big and you are so small. And yet God chooses to know you and love you. It's the kind of gratitude when you realize that you have not just made a few mistakes, but you have burnt every bridge. You have broken big relationships. And while it feels like the end, you are overwhelmed when you know that that word of forgiveness is still there for you, still there for us. And you hear that promise that nothing you can do separates you from the love of God. The kind of gratitude that is found in that 10th leper turning back overwhelmed with the gift of healing and wholeness and refusing to be separated by the one who has given him life. We know this gratitude. Now, we may not show this gratitude by falling down on the ground and shouting out praises. We are in the upper Midwest after all. But still, we can let ourselves be overwhelmed by gratitude. And we can think about how we get to act not just like people who are obedient, but people who are in love. There's no right answer, or maybe there's many right answers on how we do this. When we feel that gratitude, when we take a moment to reflect on those gifts, there are so many things we can do. We turn to God in song like that hymn tells us. How can we keep from singing? We can take a moment each time we notice a blessing and thank God. We can force ourselves to slow down a little bit and take rest, take Sabbath, because we know that God is in control, that God is God and we are not. And the gifts we are given are not dependent on the actions we do. And we can recognize that we have been abundantly gifted and share out of that abundance. However you respond, I hope you will take time to reflect on these overwhelming gifts, these gifts of forgiveness and salvation and wholeness and abundant life that we have been given, and turn to God in reckless love and gratitude, not because we are supposed to, but because we cannot help but turn to God in love. Amen.